Hey everybody, this is Kim from Read It Again Bookstore, and today I'm joined by Sarah McCraw Crow and Amanda Brainerd, and these two lovely ladies wrote The Wrong Kind of Woman and Age of Consent. Well, Wrong Age of Consent and Wrong Kind of Woman. Welcome, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so who wants to tell us about themselves first?
Amanda, you want to go?
Sure. So I'm Amanda Brainerd. I live in New York City, and this is my first, Age of Consent is my first novel. I have a day job, which we can talk about another time. But my novel I worked on for a long time, and it's semi-autobiographical, and it's a coming-of-age novel set in the early 80s, and it follows the lives of three young women as they try to come of age in a time where they have pretty lame adult role models. And it takes place in the first half is at a fictionalized, which we'll talk about later, Connecticut boarding school. And then the second half is in New York City in the summer of 1984 in the art world and nightclubs and gritty village and Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah. 80s was scary. I mean, New York City was scary in the 80s.
True. But it also had sort of
great culture,
vibrancy and culture.
Yeah.
Doesn't really have in its sort of bourgeois modern.
Well, when I was reading your book, I kept thinking of is it The Apartment?
His apartment in Hell's Kitchen.
No. There's a book called The Apartment.
Oh, The Apartment
movie.
The movie
Yeah.
with Matt Damon and Shirley MacLaine.
No, it's a book, and it's about if you saw it, you'd recognize. It's a super recognizable building, and it takes place back and forth between when the building was built, like in the early 1900s.
It's probably the Dakota.
Yeah, it's based on that. Mm-hmm. But I love how books are starting to be placed in the 80s now because we're far enough away from it that it's like historical. And so I loved
I think Sarah and I were both, even though her book is set, a good 10 years earlier, we were sort of shocked when we were told that our books could be considered historic fiction. It just seemed so, I get it now, but it seems so recent in our lives, relatively. So I think that was, but yeah, I think there's a lot of nostalgia amongst people for New York the way it used to be. And that nostalgia goes throughout multiple eras. There's books set in the 70s, books set in the 60s, books set in the 50s. And, everyone has their own memory of the New York that was the New York of their youth. And I wrote about the New York of my youth, which was in the early 80s. And yeah, it was scary. It was less scary than it had been in the 70s because it was financially more stable and there was less crime. And although even in the 70s, I wasn't really aware of how scary New York was because I was so young that I just accepted the sort of weirdness
it was. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Sarah, why don't you tell us about your book?
So, okay. The Wrong Kind of Woman is about three people who are all grappling with the death of the same person. And at the heart of the story is Virginia, who has lost her husband very suddenly, and that's Oliver. And Oliver was a history professor at the all-male Clarendon College in New Hampshire. And the novel is set in 1970 and 1971, so 10 years before Amanda's novel. And there's sort of a background pressure of the Vietnam War and all the protests and student strikes and activism. And that's kind of what Virginia starts to get into when she becomes friends with a few women that her husband really didn't like. And those are the 4 women faculty on the Clarendon campus. And 2 other main characters, and we can talk about those a little bit later.
Well, we were just talking about like them being historical books. And I know you guys both have like personal ties to your to the area, the era that you were writing about. Let's talk about a bit more about like books set in the recent past, have strong connections to your authors' own lives. By the way, I'm reading the questions that they sent me because they're the best authors to interview ever. Okay. How did you just, can you talk about the connection?
Between the time?
Yeah, let's talk more about that.
Well, so for me, I guess one of the things that I was interested in, well, two a bunch of things actually. One is I just have a lot of affection and nostalgia for the 70s, as I guess people of my age group do, because I was a little kid then.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I knew plenty about that time.
Mm-hmm.
But what got me going on this project was I am really more interested in the women of my mom's generation and even a little older than that, and how they managed their youth and how they made their choices and where they could go to college and what they could study when they were in college and that kind of thing. So I guess I like looking backwards to see how that relates to today and thinking about, if you were 40 in 1970, what would your youth have been like? And that stuff doesn't really enter the novel, but it's kind of always in the back of my head, thinking about what came before, what made those characters do what they did. And the other thing about 1970 is all of the kind of pressure of the late 60s, like think of 68 and all of the stuff that was going on, kind of like spilled over into the 70s. And so much was going on and so much change in such a short time. So it just seemed like that was a place I wanted to dwell for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Sarah, one of my earliest childhood memories was being roused, what I thought was, late at night, but it was probably only 7 or 7:30. I went to bed very early as a child. And my parents made me get out of bed and come into the kitchen and watch Nixon's resignation.
Wow.
Because they said to me, you have to see this as his history being made.
Mm-hmm.
And all I remember was thinking, why is that? How could an adult be in trouble?
Yeah.
Like, I was so ashamed for that sad looking man. I couldn't understand how he could have been. Seeing him chastised made me really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my first political memory, actually, because I can remember the sweat on his lip when he was giving a speech, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's indelible.
I said something similar to my kids when COVID started. I'm like, one day you're going to remember this. You're going to be telling your grandchildren your children about how their grandmother bleached everything that came in the door. It's kind of like, like the grandparents that survived the Depression. And so they were super frugal and they did like crazy things like reuse, plastic bags over and over again. It's kind of like that. Oh yeah. My grandmother, she bleached everything. My mother bleached everything that came through the door. I don't get why, but she did.
Yeah. It's very hard. It's very hard when you're living in the moment of something, momentous, to realize, my God, I just experienced something that will forever resonate in my life, my children's lives, my grandchildren's lives. It's kind of amazing.
We have a question, or just a statement, really. The fashions and music of the 1970s and 80s were so distinctive and iconic.
So true. Hi, Anne.
If anybody has a question who's watching, just put it in the comments and I can pop it up on the screen.
Well, they totally were, and in such different ways too, because I feel like I'm a kid of the 80s and I gravitate towards like Madonna and whatever, but the 70s were its own thing.
I think I'm a kid of the 80s too, but I really think the 70s had, when I think of like all the great music that I really love, it's almost all of it's from this. Even what I consider the 80s music, like Joy Division, that's actually from the 70s. So, the name actually, The Age of Consent, the name of my novel, is a New Order song from 1983. But that was sort of already late in what we now consider early 80s music. But I don't know about 80s fashion, and I kind of think 70s fashion's a little bit better.
Me too, but it certainly was a statement.
It was.
And you know what? What do people wear to Halloween parties? Do they wear 70s clothes or they wear 80s clothes?
Well,
sometimes they wear both, I think.
Yeah. When I was in boarding school, which is part of what we'll talk about in the novel, actually I was such a fish out of water being from New York and wearing all black that somebody actually came to my room and said, "Can I borrow your clothes on Halloween?" Yeah. Another touching moment.
Well, to your point about music, Amanda, I didn't know that was a song title. When I was writing and kind of in the middle of my pages, like maybe in a second draft or something, music was definitely a way for me to get into that mindset and think about, like, what would Sam think if he heard this song, if he's driving in a car?
I felt like
what's in the background? What's that?
I felt like your book needed a soundtrack. I remember us talking about that before. Mm-hmm.
I do have a Spotify playlist for my book, which I can send both of you later. Question.
Oh, sadly, I was Laura Ashley. I'm sorry to say.
All the way. No, I was Disney Miyake, even better.
Oh, you were ahead of your time.
I was just spoiled.
Well, I had the warmer socks, like where it looked like
leg warmers.
Yeah, but they were socks. My mom had them, and I had those. Mm-hmm. So,
did you have rainbow socks with toes? Those were my favorite 70s gear.
Which ones?
Rainbow socks with toes. Toe socks that were.
You can get those now.
Those are so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like Mark and Mindy. I think that's that mid 70s.
Nanu.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Anne is correct. There is an overlap, and it's actually the same year that the New Order song came out. Age of Consent, the Bronski Beat album came out. It's true. I need you as a fact checker on my next novel.
Let's see. What else are we going to talk about here? We're talking about different points of view. You guys both use that. You both have was it 3 characters each that kind of followed? So why did you make that choice?
Well, for me, it was not, I guess choice was maybe not. At the beginning, I was writing about Virginia and Oliver, and that's all. And I thought I was writing about a marriage and 2 people who felt like failures. And the other characters just came up over time, and they kind of inserted themselves. I had all these pages from Oliver's point of view that at some point I realized those have to go because he's going to be killed on the first page. Mm-hmm. So there was no way for me at least, to keep him in the book. But I like the idea of, when I finally got to the 3 characters, the Virginia, Rebecca, and Sam, I was pretty happy with that, even though it's a little bit unwieldy because I like to read multi-point of view novels. That's my preference, to be able to look at things through different, different characters might be looking at the same person from different perspectives. And I love that.
I think point of view is one of the, for me, that's the critical first decision. You can change it later, obviously, like you did, Sarah, but, I'm definitely a third person writer, and I prefer books written from the third person as well, or omniscient narrator. Mm-hmm. I feel like as an author, it gives me so much more flexibility. And I get sick of I get sort of claustrophobic with one point of view. Even though in some books, that claustrophobia is really effective and intentional. Mm-hmm. But so my issue with point of view was, it was clear that I would have Eve and Justine as the sort of 2 talkers, and their friendship and their points of view about their friendships and their misunderstandings are critical in the novel. But then there's a third point of view, which is actually not so dissimilar from Sarah. Like Sam is a little bit sort of exterior to her other 2 characters. India, and it was a struggle to make her hold the same weight in the narrative and she still really doesn't. She's like a third, she's a third of what each of them are. So it's bad math, but she's lesser. And I think that's okay, but I definitely had to write more scenes and weave her more into the first part of the book, where she's less of a character than in the second part of the book, to make it sort of all come out in a way that felt equitable.
I think it worked. I didn't notice. Worked for me.
Yeah, I think you can do whatever you want to do. I mean, that was a smart decision to weave her more into the beginning, the earlier pages, so that when she pops up, that's not a total shock.
Author, we can do anything we want as long as we don't jolt the reader out of the book.
Yes.
We can take the reader wherever we want as long as we do it well.
And I think you can jolt the reader out of the book as long as you warn people that something happens. Like you can put it in the preface, like she's living this great life and then something happened. So if people expect it, they're like, okay, yeah, sure. She killed her entire family and went to Mexico.
This brings up something that I wanted to ask Sarah about, that Sarah and I talked about in the past, which is historic accuracy and how to make sure that you don't jolt the reader out of the story by throwing something in there that's clearly inaccurate.
I've done that. I've read books about Atlanta and they'll say something and I'm like, that's not true. And I'll stop reading the book.
That's right. So that is just like, it's all over, you know?
But it is funny because you don't, as Amanda and I have talked about a little bit, when you're writing the recent past, you kind of feel like you know it. And so you don't have to really do research. And I can imagine, Amanda, that you felt like, you know, that time you lived it. You don't have to like go back and check stuff. And I felt that way too, even though I was like in, I guess, preschool in 1970. I thought I got a good handle on this time. But it turns out I didn't at all. And I had to do a lot of research.
Were there things that you wrote in your book that you then had to remove because they were historically not from the right time period? Or
there was a little of that, but it was more that I didn't have a sense of what people were going through at that time. I didn't have a sense of how much pressure the war was on everybody, even if you were not a young man, even if you were, you know, in your 40s or whatever. That was just this kind of, it was just much more pervasive. And I didn't realize that until some of my early readers who were some of my teachers, and they're like in their late 60s and early 70s, and they set me straight. So I had to go back and do more research.
Well, so that's interesting. I wonder to what extent we'll look back on this period and think about the strain that it took on, you know, the toll it took on all of us. I had a friend who said he finally got his second vaccine and, you know, he just feels like a completely new man and now has some zoom out perspective on how stressed he was.
Yeah, after my first one, like, because I'm getting my second one on Monday, even just like at 50-something% immunity, I feel so much more comfortable. I'm like, sure, I'll walk through that crowded room as long as everybody's wearing masks because I'm wearing a mask. But before, I would have hid.
So one of the things that was starting to be really a big deal in 1983 is obviously AIDS. And although Ronald Reagan never actually said the word AIDS until 1984 publicly, you probably know that. But so I was under the misimpression when I first started writing my book that AIDS was fully blown in the early 80s, which it wasn't. I mean, it was in a way, but it wasn't part of common parlance in the way, and a lot of people hadn't died yet. It really wasn't until the late 80s that it was sort of, so that was something that I had to reevaluate. There was much more AIDS in the book initially, and I had to remove a lot of it just because it was inaccurate. And I told Sarah also about, so there were two really humiliating fact checker, some, 22-year-old fact checker found something that I think I made Mercer Street go in the wrong direction, or Worcester Street go in the wrong direction. I've lived in New York my entire life. I still am not over that, actually. I cannot believe I messed that up. Like, that is, to me, is just, if that had stayed in the book, that would have been one of those things, Kim, you would have just picked one.
Yeah, that's the kind of tiny thing that doesn't matter to the story, but if the reader sees it and they're like, that's not right, then they stop trusting you.
That's right. You're done.
So speaking of readers and your locations, what has been feedback from your readers on like New York and was it California? I can't remember which yours was that.
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Oh, they're both up there.
So Sarah, you talk.
No, you go ahead.
So I feel like, it's so funny when I feel like this is a small anecdote, but the book and movie, The Ice Storm, when my husband and I went to see that, to us, it was literally like I could smell the 70s. It was so evocative. I was transported. And my mother was like, it wasn't like that at all. And his mother was like, oh, that was ridiculous. It wasn't like that at all. So that's that's nostalgia and memory, which is different for everyone. Some people have said, most people have said to me, oh my God, and especially in the boarding school section, it really took me back. I mean, I was there. You know, I'm sure there are other people who didn't tell me it wasn't like that at all. So yeah, that's been the reaction.
Yeah. So most of my novel is set at a college that's a fictionalized Dartmouth college, and it even has Dartmouth on the, so that tower in the background of the cover is Baker Tower at Dartmouth. And I was really worried about, I mean, I wasn't worried generally speaking, but I was worried about what are my Dartmouth friends and classmates and et cetera going to say, and people at Dartmouth going to be mad or something. And they've just been like, they seem to have been just happy to see it in print, to like visit it and see what's the same. And I mean, I changed a lot of stuff, so it is a little more fictionalized, I would say. I had to get some distance in order to write it. So some things are just like not like reality.
Sarah, when did Dartmouth go co-ed? Do you know?
So Dartmouth went co-ed in 1972, and they had been kind of like futzing around with it for a while. They had exchange students for a while to try to like push off the decision, and then they finally admitted women, and they admitted like one woman for every 4 or 5 men. But weirdly, Dartmouth went co-ed before Harvard did. So that's
probably because Harvard had Radcliffe as a full-blown college.
Right.
You know, it's interesting.
It is, although it's not the same.
So my novel cover is actually a photograph of my friend Angela, taken during college by my friend Celia. And that is a college dorm room at Harvard, which is kind of hard to believe because it's so beautiful. But they were in Adam's house, which is legendary for its gorgeous rooms. Those rooms were wood paneled and had working fireplaces. And it was really, look, those are French doors, just, you know, French window looking out on the.
My college had gorgeous dorms too. Yeah.
So youth is wasted on the young, as they say.
It really is.
So there was no air conditioning, and this was Atlanta. So.
Oh, that's not good.
No, there's no air conditioning at Harvard either.
Yeah, oh, well, for Harvard, probably be more of an issue of heat, right?
Yeah, but now, I mean, it's with global warming, it's really hot there. I've spent some of the hottest days of my life being in Boston.
Boston is hot. It's like when it's hot, it's really hot. But that's true everywhere.
I remember being in the city in New York, and it was like in the hundreds, and you know it just hits the asphalt, and then you just melt, and there's no air. Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. We got another comment. I know the backstory. Amanda's cover. Please tell it. Oh, you just did that. But it doesn't know the backstory of Sarah's cover, and you kind of said that too. But that's a great question, Anne.
Well, yeah. So the backstory. So my cover, when they first started talking about the cover and what the art department was thinking about, they said they wanted it to be mostly like typography, I guess, and that they were looking at the Knicks, I think, as an example, to kind of build on something like that. And they were asking for image ideas, and I think I said, well, you could look at some Dartmouth images, and they put when they first put the cover together, and I saw the first iteration, there was Baker Tower, and I was like, is that allowed? Can you do that? And they were like, oh yeah, you just buy the rights, it's fine. So, but it had that cover, like many covers, it had like this long story, because the original cover was a different kind of typography, and it looked like more mid-70s, I would say. Like if you think of, speaking of Mork and Mindy, it was like that kind of lettering, and the feedback came back from booksellers. They did not like it. And so they went back to the drawing board and redid it and came up with that.
Well, I love the color fade on it, and I love the color fade on yours. I would say that the same person designed both covers, because they just go beautiful.
They are similar. They both have bright colors and black and white photograph.
Yeah,
I just love the hot pink on both of those. And the fade. Yeah,
they're gorgeous.
So originally they wanted to do bright orange on mine, and I just said, listen, this is the early 80s. Hot pink is early 80s, not bright orange. But yeah, no, I think Viking did a really great job.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's so personal. That's so nice that it's
that like was really, I mean, the photographs they showed me before were, you know, sort of I mean, they were not, I didn't love them, but they were also just impersonal, and being able to actually, I mean, Angela and Celia are like thrilled, it's like they're Celia,
so nice.
the woman who did that photograph did countless incredible, very much edgier than that one, photographs in her dorm room of all of us. And she's got to make a book out of it someday, because it's sort of a documentation of an era. And she was really a talented photographer. And there was a lot of debauchery in that dorm room as well.
Yeah. Well, there's some debauchery in your book. Oh goodness, I like debauchery.
Yeah. Yes.
We were talking about setting your books on campuses and weaving that into your story. I mean, what would your books be like if they're about campuses? What if they didn't take place on a campus?
Yeah, campuses are definitely little Tempest in a Teapot kind of thing, hot houses or whatever, where everything is more elevated. And I mean, I feel like my novel is not exactly a campus novel. There's like a certain model for a campus novel, and this is not it. But I love that there is that, especially in the early 70s, you think of all the stuff that was happening on campuses, all the even in more traditional campuses like a Clarendon, all the stuff that was kind of starting to change. And it's like a fertile, full of possibility kind of place to set a novel. So
go ahead.
Is like it. I went to this. Mine is set at Griswold Academy, which is a fictionalized Choate Rosemary Hall, and I got kicked out of Choate at the end of 10th grade, and it's a very traumatic experience, as you can imagine. And so I, in a way, wrote. Part of the novel was sort of exercising demons and sort of going back and figuring out things that happened in my life, but making them fiction and reworking them, and sort of it was just it was sort of like it was sort of therapeutic. But I felt absolutely no compunction about making it totally transparent that it was Choate. I mean, because one of the things that's interesting is in my novel there's I don't know if you want to call it sexual abuse, but the teacher hits on Eve, and the wanker hits on Eve, and luckily she gets kicked out before their actual first sexual encounter. Sort of stroke of good luck for her. But that teacher is based very, very directly and obviously on a real teacher. And in 2017, there was this report on the front of the Times about the history of sexual abuse and this long investigation at Choate. And so I felt like everyone knows that this was going on. It was going on at every boarding school, still probably going on at every boarding school. And, so I didn't feel like I wasn't revealing anything about that people didn't know about Choate or any other school. And I wasn't on a smear campaign against Choate. It's just, I didn't feel like I needed to cover them up, or, I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to cover it up. So I wanted it to be obvious that it was the place that it was. And, actually when, you were asking about the reaction of people, and so many of my friends from Choate, or people I didn't even know from Choate, have come out of the woodwork going, oh my God, totally took me back. And in fact, there was this field where all the bad things happened above campus called the Skeets. And one of my friends from Choate started a Facebook group called Children of the Skeets. So
yeah. But there is that sense with a boarding school or a small college that people are going to be protective of it. And especially when you think of back in the day, what was happening in fraternities in the college scene and the teacher student stuff in the boarding schools, that was cut up, pretty extensively for so long. And even now, people who are the truth tellers are they're getting punished for speaking out. So
it's true. I don't know. I also, I feel like I couldn't have set the whole novel on a campus, because I actually really was only on that campus for almost a year. And so much of the stuff that I wanted to write about needed to take place in New York or in the Hamptons, or places that were I just wanted to bring the reader into other venues with these characters.
Okay, this is a crazy question, but did you ever think of just setting the whole novel in New York, like that one summer? You know, what happened that one summer?
I totally could have. I could have set the whole thing in one place or the other. I wanted to do it all. But yeah.
I love the fact that both y'all's books, where the setting is a character. You know what I mean? I love that. That's one of my favorite things in books. Like, really, you have like 4 main characters, both of you guys. Your three narrators, and the setting. Well, 2 settings, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to, in terms of immersing the reader in a story, to bring the environs to life.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we all live in a place, and that place affects us, and it's true in fiction as well. Yeah.
You could have 4 or 5. I'm sorry, because then also the era that it takes place in is another character.
Yeah, that's true. There's the time setting, which is just as important.
It is. Sarah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say something about place, which is, well, you can't have a place affects the characters, and the characters affect the place. And, you know, thinking of my character, Virginia, how she was an in-between kind of person, because she didn't fit in her hometown, and she didn't quite fit in on the campus. And so, and place was a big part of that.
Campus. Let's talk about like how women's lives have changed from the 70s and the 80s to today, which sounds like a radio station. 70s, 80s, and today. That'd be the 90s. So 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and today.
Yes. Only 50 years ago.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, seriously?
Yeah. So that was 50 years ago. Wow. I mean, things have changed. Things have changed for the better for women in so many ways. All of the things in my novel that are just sort of hinted at, like, you know, a woman can't get a mortgage without a husband. A woman can't even get a credit card without her husband's signature. All of those things. There was no women. There was no gender equity in the law. There was no real protection. And so some of that has changed so much. But then you think about, we just got a woman vice president in 2021. That's crazy. I mean, yeah.
I only really had a clear sense of how things have changed when, and this is different than women's rights. This is more sort of the question of consent again, and sex. So my editor had an assistant who was probably 22 years old, and she read the book and she was appalled. She was like, "These women are being assaulted," and I was like, "What? This is just what happened all the time. I mean, what do you mean?" It had never even occurred to me. The word assault was not part of what I was thinking at all. And I still don't really see it that way. I mean, I know I should, but it was amazing to me and sort of mind-boggling that was her reaction. It was indignation. I guess, you know, one should be indignant reading these things, but I was just telling it like it was, you know, without, I mean, yes, I have I'm lurking in the background as the author with, you know, obviously I'm setting these things out for the reader to judge. But I don't have a very overwhelming, judgy voice as an author, for which I've gotten plenty of flack from millennials, I promise you. But it was eye-opening to me that was her reaction. I was shocked.
So that's a sign of progress, though. I mean, that's
exactly.
We didn't have the language back then.
No.
I remember talking to a relative of mine about date rape, and she's 10 years older than me, so she's in her 50s, and just talking about like, okay, this is date rape, and she's like, but that happened all the time when I was a kid. I'm like, no, that is not cool. That is date rape. No, see, that just happened. That's what happened.
Yeah, boys didn't ask; they just took.
Yeah, she's like, that's just how it was.
Yeah,
like,
completely.
No, and that was like, I mean, you think of all the 80s movies and stuff. That was like, speaking of consent, there was no consent. Like Pretty in Pink.
Pretty in Pink.
Or 16 Candles.
Yeah. Pretty in Pink?
Oh, does not stand up. That is
horrifying.
Yes.
Oh, 16 Candles?
16 Candles. There's definitely some.
No, not Pretty in Pink. Sorry, 16 Candles. You're right.
16 Candles, where she wakes up the next morning, she's like, did we?
Yeah.
Did we? Oh, that's, and then he practically hands her, like the hero hands her to this other guy, and the other guy's like, oh yeah. And she's like, yeah, just have sex with her. She won't know. She doesn't care. She's out of it.
It's so wrong. And we just were like, ha, that's hilarious.
That was comedy. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's
I bet both those guys are horrified by that.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I mean, the rest of the movies pretty much held up. It's just of John Hughes movies, but that one did not.
That one didn't at all.
Yeah.
You know? And also the concept of like whatever Michael Schoenfeld's character is, saving her, seeing through the girl who's not beautiful to I mean, it's just so offensive. But
that was our youth.
That is real progress, Sarah. You're correct.
Yep, you're right. So what are you guys working on now?
So I actually am working on something set in the 80s, speaking of early 80s.
Yeah,
but
everybody go forward a decade.
I know, we're slowly moving forward.
The 90s.
But it's such a mush that I can't even. I think one character has some precognition and it's causing him a lot of trouble. But I don't know what's going to happen with these pages. I'm not even at a first draft yet.
Okay.
So I did a first draft of another novel that I've been working on for a while, and it needs a lot of work. I put it, these things, you think you can just do this, and you can't. It's just it takes a really long time, and for me, I have to get to know my characters on the page. I mean, there's that term plotter pantser. I need to be more of a plotter. I need to be a little more organized, but I'm really a pantser. And so with Age of Consent, I kind of knew all these characters to a certain degree before I started writing the book because they were based on real people. Although I had to understand the people, I had to come to understand them through writing them. But the next book are people just, who I created from nothing. So that's the struggle, is getting to really inside these characters and figuring out who they are. And it really takes time. It's hard.
It does take time. And Amanda and I are in a group of debut authors. It's like a supportive Facebook group. And there seem to be
a writer support group.
It is a writer support group, and it's very helpful. But there are a number of our group who are like about to publish number 2 or working on book number 3. And
some of them have book deals on number 2, or their number 2 book is about to come out. It's kind of
you guys can't compare yourself.
No, I think good. I'm not jealous. I think it's great for them. Both of us can only work at the pace that we can work.
Yeah.
No, and there's something to be said for time, if you can give yourself the gift of time, because things happen. Amanda, I'm sure this happened to you, that if you put something away for a little while and you come back to it, you realize, oh my God, this has to happen. And if you had cranked it out, you never would have gotten to that, whatever that weird little thing was that you got to.
So there is so much that happens in the unconscious moments. When you're not writing, or you're walking in the park, or, that is really the power of creativity. The creative process is so much fun. First of all, it's difficult, but it's so much fun when you have this aha moment when you're not even thinking about that thing that you're thinking about. It's really exciting.
Yeah, it's
so great. Experience that also. It's one of the things that makes it all worthwhile, really.
Yeah, and it is so great when you're doing something else. Like for me, it comes when I'm gardening or in the shower or taking a walk or something. Yeah.
I plan out everything in the shower. I should shower more.
So I planned out all of Age of Consent. Like I would write a chapter, and then I would when I didn't have my day job to grapple with, I would go for a long walk in Central Park. And I would think about the next scene filmically. Like I would think, okay, this is what happens. And I would see it, and I would come home and I would either take notes if I didn't have time to write it, but I would. So I guess that's sort of a plotter, but it was like bit by bit plotter.
Yeah, no, because sometimes you can say, like I've done that at the beginning of a walk. I'll say, I don't know what's going to happen with this character. What is this? There's some little problem. And by the end of the walk, something will have come up. It's like I ask my brain to do something and take a walk.
Processes it behind the scenes and then spits it out.
So incredible, actually.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I think that's really interesting, and I don't know if this happened to you, Sarah, but for me, naming characters was very revelatory. Like I would pick a name for a character that actually had something to do with another person, and I'd forgotten that and realized later on, oh my God, I can't name that character. That's so-and-so, that it's all in the back of your brain in some kind of treacherous, bizarre way. It's really entertaining.
It is. Well, names are a whole other thing. Like we could probably talk for another hour just about names and figuring out.
No, and I did actually call one of my characters. I called the character who's my friend on whom I based Stanley, and I said, I'm thinking of naming you Stanley. He's the only one that I actually talked to in that way. Like it's a fictional book, right? I mean, we do it as a joke, but I called him up. I'm like, what do you think about Stanley? And he's married, and he's like, my husband thinks, it should be Gordon. And I'm like, I hate Gordon.
That's so funny that you almost gave him the option. Like you're opening that door to having him name your character.
Hilarious. His husband might have come up with Stanley. It might've been something else before that, but and his name is Stanley Glasgow, and Glasgow is a family name way back in his family history that he wanted me to use. So I did.
Well, that works.
And funny, but yeah. So you were asking about what we're working on next. I've put that in the drawer, and I'm working on something nonfiction. Believe it or not.
Nonfiction.
Love nonfiction.
Yes. So that's a whole different ballgame. So
can you talk about that?
I can't really yet, but I will be able to soon.
Okay.
It's about something.
Does it take place can you tell us what decade it takes place in?
It's last year.
Oh.
Last year. Yeah, that's another thing. That's something that's actually really interesting because Sarah, by being in the 80s, you avoid this, but the novel that I've just put in the drawer for the moment to let marinate is set in today. And one of the things that's really difficult about setting a novel in contemporary times is texting and emailing, because so much of our communication is through text and email. And God knows, 20 years from now, are you going to look back at a novel that has texting and email?
Yeah. My stepmother she wrote a book, and she said it specifically in the 70s so she wouldn't have to deal with it.
It's a really big problem for authors. It's a huge problem. And it's sort of an insurmountable problem. I mean, it's sort of, I don't think you can set a novel in contemporary times really, really and avoid it 100%.
Well, it is amazing how many contemporary novels there are that don't deal with it. They pretend that there aren't cell phones, basically. Yeah. That's true. And that it's kind of nice, but it isn't realistic at all.
Yeah.
It takes an enormous amount of calisthenics or gymnastics for an author to avoid email and texting.
Well, because when half the time in books, the major conflict are two people just not communicating. And you can be like, well, let me just call them, or let me just text.
Right. Well, and you always know where somebody is. No one's ever lost. There's no
unless they're really lost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So many topics or, settings or, or conflicts are removed by cell phones, novels.
Yes.
So cell phones are just doing us a total service on every level.
Right. The novel ends on like page 10 because there was no problem.
Like, where's my phone? Friend locator. Okay, there they are. Let me just call them and text them. Okay, book is over.
Yeah. It's very, very difficult to deal with as an author.
Well, it does make me wonder if that's part of why people love historical fiction so much right now. I mean, it seems like it's so big.
No, that's what you're right. Yeah. Yeah, disconnecting. Yeah.
Well, there's always that feeling of the sort of, simpler time. I love telling my children, how we used to make plans back in the 80s. So you'd call someone from the payphone and you'd call their mother, and then their mother would call so-and-so. I mean, you would make a date, and if they didn't show up, date was off.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. But we made it work. I mean, it was possible to live in those times.
I know. We totally made it work.
I was telling my kids about planning trips. So you go to AAA and you tell them where you're going, and they give you a triptych.
Get a triptych. Oh yeah.
Or you go to, or you go exchange money at like a money exchange place,
Yes, get your traveler's checks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It totally worked.
Yeah.
It did. It really did. Everyone knew how to do it. And
nobody knew that there was an easier way because it didn't exist yet.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was true also. I read a lot of 19th century novels. I mean, people communicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They found each other.
They did.
I mean, sure, it may take a month or two to get your letters, but yeah, everything was just
Actually,
slow.
what's really interesting to me in 19th century novels is like you could be in the countryside in England and you could get a letter in London that same day because you'd get some poor person to go sit on a horse and go galloping to London.
Yeah, they had like the afternoon mail.
Considering the way our post office is working right now, it seems like a big improvement to be on horseback.
Oh yeah, going back to Pony Express.
Oh man.
All right, guys, I had such a great time. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having us, Kim.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kim.
Thank you for including me.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. This was so great.
Mm-hmm.
It was. All right.
And can we just have Kim say something talk about your bookstore for a second?
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Well, first off, you can order The Wrong Kind of Woman and Age of Consent on our website. We have copies available. Currently, our store is closed because we had a flood. So if you guys are feeling, not talking to you guys, but people watching or feel like they want to support us, we'd really appreciate it. We have a GoFundMe page. We are moving our store to a temporary location, and it's pretty intense. So when I left today, they were about to cut holes in all the walls looking for water. And they pulled up all the flooring, which is new as of we put it down 2 years ago. So yeah, we lost all our picture books. And, our damaged merchandise isn't that bad. But when you have bookshelves on all the walls and then you need to get into all the walls, you got to take all the books off, pull the bookshelves off, and then go into the walls. So it's pretty damn invasive. So yeah. And we've been around for 18 years. So, I mean, we have people who've grown up in our bookstore, and it's emotional for everybody. So, but the best thing came out of this, and I was telling Sarah, is that the overwhelming support that we have felt from our community is just like our hearts are just overfilling, and words. Yeah, I can't words. So and it's just been amazing. Like people showing up to bring us lunch, people bringing us trash bags, our GoFundMe page. It's just been amazing. So
bookstores are so important. They just are. What will we do without them?
They really are just sort of the heart of a community. I mean, even in New York City, my, independent bookstore around the corner is just, I wouldn't want to live in the neighborhood without it.
Yeah. Which one do you shop at?
The corner bookstore.
Corner bookstore. Sarah, what was your favorite bookstore again?
Gibson's in Concord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I remember talking about that. Yeah. So anyway, people watching at home or on their phones elsewhere, if you don't buy from us, please support your local independent bookstore, be it the book Gibson's or was it Corner Books?
Corner Bookstore.
Yeah. I love that name. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I put a link in our description, down there for people to buy books. So please support us. So thanks, guys. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Amanda.
Bye.
Night.
Good night.